And we're live.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to another SEDC digital event about European FDI projects post-COVID and how you can take advantage of these upcoming projects that may be coming your way. But before I introduce our panelists today, I wanted to make a quick reminder of an upcoming event just under a month, our Meet the Consultants event in Atlanta, November the 16th and the 17th. We'll be at the beautiful Whitley Hotel in the Buckhead area on the north side of Atlanta. And as a reminder for all you that like the Bonvoy points, the Whitley is a Marriott Luxury Collection hotel, so you can get those points. We'll have a great lineup of around 18 consultants that will be on panels addressing various trends in industry sectors. So that will be some good information. And then at our reception in the evening, you'll get a chance to network with other Atlanta-based site location consultants. So I encourage you to go online today at sedc.org, register for the event, and then also book your room at the Whitley, because that block will be dropping in, I think, about a week. If you have any questions for the panelists, this is a traditional Zoom platform, so you can just type those in at the bottom, click on the little arrow down there and type the question in. The panelists will be monitoring the questions as they come up, and Matthew on staff will kind of be helping them if it's especially something pertinent to what they're talking about right at the moment. And then at the end of the session, there will be the regular Q&A that you can post and type in some questions as well. So now I want to move on to introduce our panelists. And of course, our topic today is going to be around the area of FDI. And we've got some great presenters that have some highly depth experience with European projects coming to the US. First up is Matthias Bayer. Matthias is the president and CEO of the Transatlantic Business and Investment Council, or as we say, TBIC. They have offices in Atlanta and Berlin. I think right now, Matthias, you're in Berlin, correct?
Correct. I'm in Berlin, and that's also why it's a little bit dark here in my office, because we have some kind of thunderstorm outside. I wanted to take a train to Hamburg later today. I'm not really sure if that will work out. It gives me more time to talk here.
And in Matthias's former management function, he was with an international consultancy. He supported European countries of various industries as they entered the US market, and thereby well connected to both US and European business communities. He is the point of contact for TBIC. I think probably several of our folks on the session today are good members of TBIC, and we'd encourage those of you that are not to take a look at them. They've got some great benefits for helping you connect with, especially those European FDI projects. Next up, we have James Blair. Jim is certainly no stranger to any of us. Jim has over 40 years of experience in the site selection and project management business for economic development. He was the director of the German American Chamber of Commerce's site selection program, the southern section based in Atlanta, for 2 years, and then the director of Georgia's European office based in Brussels for 18 years. Then returned to Atlanta in 2005 as the director of the Georgia Economic Development's Foreign Direct Investment Program and its 6 international offices. He has worked with over 175 companies that located business operations in the United States. So gentlemen, enough about you and me as well. So I'll turn it over to Jim and to Matthias, and take us away.
All right. Thank you so much, Gene, for this great introduction. Thank you also, Matthew, for helping us to all get online here and on board. Again, I'm very glad to have the chance to do this webinar together with Jim Blair. We had one FDI update. It was earlier this year on the current Corona and COVID and FDI situation from Europe. So I'm happy to do another update today with you. Jim and I work very closely with European companies. He serves in an honorary position on the advisory council of the TBIC, and that's why we're often teaming up for webinars like that. And that's why we also share this presentation here today. Whenever you've got a question, you can virtually, I think, raise your hand or put it in the Q&A. But as you know, when you're speaking yourself, it's sometimes not that easy also to observe that and to see that. So also use the Q&A in the end in case we don't see your question, or also Jean or Matthew, please feel free to interrupt us if there is an urgent question coming up. So even though most of you might be familiar with Jim and me, we would like to give you a brief introduction on both of our organizations. I will then speak or give you an overview on the COVID situation here in Europe, also on economic projections for Europe. Then we will have, then Jim will share some of his insights on ongoing European and FDI projects in the US. I will also share the insights and experience that we've made over the last months, and how we feel the pulse, let's say, of the European industry looking at the US. And then we also want to help you, or to give you some recommendations of what we think would be useful for the next months to do to recruit international companies, but also to be prepared for the new normal. I don't really like this term that much, to be honest, but the things as they are right now, let's say, and what is very important, has become important also for economic development, especially with international projects. So we have, Jim and I, we have about 40 minutes now to speak, and then we have roughly 15 minutes for the Q&A. So I think we should be pretty good on time. All of our slides will be shared later on, or we are open to share them. And there will sometimes be more information than we can talk about in this webinar. So you will also receive the slides later on. So Jim, now I did the talking in the beginning. Now I would like to hand it over to you to tell us a bit more about you and Navigator Consulting.
Sure. Thank you, Matthias. I'm sure many of you know Navigator Consulting. We've worked in throughout the Southeast and many parts of the Midwest too, up through Ohio and Michigan, but certainly in Kentucky and Tennessee, throughout the US really. And Navigator Consulting, we describe ourselves as a boutique site selection company. That's a nice way of saying we're a very small company. We've got an office here in Atlanta and also in Düsseldorf, Germany. My colleague had planned to join us today, Philip Marshall, but he's actually just landing back in Düsseldorf after being in the US for a while. You see on the left a little bit of an overview of what we've been doing over the last 8 years since I started the company here in Atlanta. We've successfully located 21 projects, and they represent now almost $2 billion of capital investment and over 4,000 job announcements. We also do economic development organization consulting services. That's basically helping companies upgrade their foreign direct investment strategies, understand better how to prepare for international projects, communicate their messages, and work with international executives. On the right, you kind of see an overview of the kind of projects we've worked, and I'm often asked, what is your focus? And the focus is really across the board, from consumer products to aerospace and automotive. But what they all have in common actually is that they're all advanced manufacturing. Europe is a high cost production market. So these companies don't come over here with minor projects or projects that do not involve advanced manufacturing. So we're talking about high-end skill sets, industry 4.0 type of concepts. So they're quite demanding in the kind of workforce they're going to be requiring. The companies that we work with are typically small to mid-sized companies, and they fit quite well into the communities across the Southeast. Typically, they're going into communities that are, let's say, 1 hour outside of a major metro area, or I shouldn't even say major, because this could be an area of 200,000 people, but the companies want to have access to the amenities of a larger community, but they don't have to be in an Atlanta or a Nashville or Charlotte, but they do want those access to those services and infrastructure. Next.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry, that was my mistake. So yeah, thank you very much, Jim. Now I would like to say a few words about TBIC. Most of you, I think, are familiar with us. We are also a member of SEDC and like to partner with SEDC on various occasions. We are a member organization for local US EDOs. We have selected members that we represent here in Europe, that we connect with European companies planning to expand in the US to the US. So that is also how we see our role here with our organization. We have an office of 6 here in Berlin. We reach out to companies all over Europe. We try to connect them with our members, introduce them to our members at events, at trade shows, at recruitment missions. And some of these companies we can directly introduce to our members or send out information. With other companies, we look for a site selection consultant on our advisory council, like Jim, for example, to take over this project if the company really needs a site selection consultant to professional site selection. So together with these advisory council members, we've located more than 70 European companies in the US over the last years, created almost 15,000 jobs. And as Jim described it very well, exactly these kind of companies, the medium-sized enterprises, often family-owned, usually advanced manufacturing companies, who are often looking for communities that are nearby an interstate, who have access to an international airport probably, but it does not necessarily mean that this community needs to be a major metropolitan area, because where the companies are coming from are also often rather rural areas in Europe, and that's also what they are looking for when they're coming to the US. So things like cost of doing business, tax environment, sites, buildings, that's really what is important for them. We currently represent about 100 EDOs from the US here in Europe. And yeah, we already had our first recruitment trip after Corona in person again, but I'll tell you more about this later. So for now, that's it for TBIC. And I would just like to tell you a little bit more, just to give you a brief overview about the COVID situation here in Europe and the vaccination situation. So please don't be shocked about this slide. There is a lot of information, I know. I will share this slide later along with the whole presentation. What is important here to see is that we have listed a couple of major Western European countries like the UK, France, Germany, Italy, and the European Union, and also in comparison to the United States. So it's a bit easier than for you to make a reference. So what you can see is that the vaccination rates in continental EU countries and European and the UK are comparable to the US. They are about 10% higher now at the moment. After a slow start, Europe has caught up and we're at about 60 to 70% at the moment in most countries in Europe. That also allows us to go back to a lot of more or less normal kind of events, conferences, etc. When we talk about international traveling, and I have a slide for this later on as well, what the rules are for Americans coming to Europe or the European Union at the moment. But in terms of traveling, you can travel to all of these countries and to the European Union and also between the countries in the European Union. There are different rules in place. Usually you need to show a negative corona test or a vaccination or a proof of recovery. In some countries, like in the UK, you need a proof of vaccination. But that really depends on the country. It also changes from time to time, depending on the situation. But in general, that's the case. So whenever you want to travel from A to B in Europe at the moment, you just look it up online, what's the current regulation, but in general, it is possible without big difficulties, I would say. The restrictions, the COVID-related restrictions taking apart the UK are stricter than in the United States. In Italy, for instance, you have to be vaccinated to work in an office at the moment. So this is quite a high pressure to get vaccinated. Also in France, in many restaurants, you can only go to the restaurant or bar if you have a proof of vaccination or of recovery. But very often you can also do things like in Germany, for instance, you can usually show your vaccination pass, or you can also show a proof of a negative test. But this is essential for many things you would like to do. I mean, it is hard at the moment to do things without a proof of vaccination or recovery, or at least a negative test. So that are the two options. Nevertheless, also that is changing from time to time, depending if numbers are going up or down. They are comparatively low in Europe. And that's why this is possible, but the restrictions are a little bit higher in Europe for those who are not vaccinated or tested. That's the main takeaway, I would say, from this slide. If we have a look at the next slide, you can see the daily new confirmed COVID cases per million people on the left-hand side. So you can see that the UK has pretty high case numbers at the moment. They had a Freedom Day a few months ago. So there is no mask requirement. There is basically everything is allowed, also without masks or proof of vaccination in many parts of the UK. That's why they have comparatively high case numbers at the moment. Nevertheless, a lot of these cases are kids that can't get vaccinated at the moment, or people who are getting who are getting COVID even though they are vaccinated, but the death rate or the fatalities are comparatively low. And that's also what you see on the right-hand side. You see that most of the European countries have fatality rate of about 50% of the United States. So in general, it is safe to travel here. It is safe to do business here. It is as safe as it can be, let's say it like that. But I think the numbers are looking quite okay, even though the case numbers are going up in the EU and in the UK at the moment, while they are going down, I think, in most parts of the United States. And this is just a brief overview on the vaccination rate. The blue line that you can see on the left, I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but the blue line that you see on the left, that is the US. So you see that this high-speed rollout of the vaccination program was very successful in the US, whereas the EU and the UK, but especially the EU, were much slower in that sense. They have caught up so that they have leveled on a similar number now, which leaves about 10% gap, as I've described on a slide earlier. So what is the general takeaway from that? It is possible to travel to Europe. It is as safe as it can be at the moment, and business is going on, even though the requirements in terms of wearing masks or being vaccinated or showing a proof of showing a negative test is a bit stricter than it is in the United States. This is also something which you should keep in mind if you have European visitors. They might sometimes be a bit more strict in terms of wearing a KN95 mask or whatever, just to know that this is taken very seriously, as also in many parts of the US, of course. So let's have a look at the economic impact of Corona, or on how the economy is bouncing back at the moment. On the right-hand side, you can see the GDP growth, if I might call it like this, in 2020. So all the numbers were going down. The growth was decreasing, actually. And you see now the projected growth for 2021 looks quite okay. So the economies are bouncing back, even though they are bouncing back slowlier than they do in the United States. So they cannot completely get back to the numbers they had before. Nevertheless, for 2022, the projected numbers are looking very good. So in the end, I think it might take a little bit, but we're about to get over this. And the atmosphere in that sense is also quite positive. Also, if you have a look at the unemployment rates, they might look, especially the Italian one and the French one, they might look quite high from an American perspective, but they are also traditionally higher in Italy and in France. So the numbers that you see there are more or less pre-crisis numbers. And one of the reasons for that is that we had, like in the US, we had massive public spending programs to make it easier for companies to keep their employees. So most of them also kept their employees, which I think is also a positive sign. So they obviously also thought that they would need these people also in the future, that things are going to be better. And that's also what we see at the moment with FDI in and outflows. The perspective is rather positive, I would say. Also on the next slide, again, I have to apologize for a lot of information on these slides. On the next slides, you can see, especially the first 3 bullet points are important here, that major challenges for European companies and industries at the moment are rather challenges that companies all over the world have to face, also American companies, like the semiconductor shortage. That's the biggest challenge for automotive, not suppliers, but the OEMs maybe here in Germany. So some of the factories had to be closed again, even though the reason for it was not Corona anymore, but it was the shortage of semiconductors. Then we have a bottleneck here and there with commodities that companies need, with chemicals companies need. Shipping costs went up, commodity prices went up. The same challenges I think that many American companies face as well. What is a bit different here are also the extremely high gas prices at the moment. Europe is dependent also on gas imports, and the prices have risen significantly over the last weeks and months, so they're on record high at the moment. And this, of course, also makes production processes more expensive than they used to be in the past, and the economy, of course, in some way less competitive. Nevertheless, I can tell you just from my personal impression, in March and early April this year, I think we were all quite depressed here in Central Europe, because we saw like the vaccination numbers in the US and the successful rollout of the program. So we thought, okay, what's wrong with us that we are not doing that well? That has changed a lot. The atmosphere is very positive now with the high vaccination rates. There are no doubts that there won't be any lockdowns anymore. The economy has, those parts of the economy, and that's mainly industry, they could adjust to the new situation, and we're looking very positively into even the winter, but especially next spring and summer then to go back to normal. And that's also showcased by tourism that we had in Europe. We have many countries here, especially Southern European countries like Greece or Spain, who are highly dependent on the tourists also coming from Northern Europe there in summer. That has been the case again. So things are looking positively from our perspective, and we're optimistic about the next month and the near future. So that being said, I'd like to hand it over to Jim, who will go a little bit more into detail after this macro overview. And I've promised Jim before I won't talk about COVID for too long. I mean, we have talked about this so often, yeah. So now we also want to have a look on what do companies say, how do projects develop that you are working on, Jim?
Well, thank you, Matthias. Thank you for not depressing us too much about COVID. You give me a chance to talk about COVID just a little bit here as well. What I'd like to do is talk about the impact on business confidence over the last year, partially due to COVID, but some other risks also that you mentioned, supply chain and inflation. And I'm going to refer to the 2021 McKinsey Global Survey, which looked at, they interviewed executives around the world. And I found it very interesting that American executives and European executives were very close to how they viewed future risks to the world economy. They still viewed COVID as an ongoing risk, sometimes not because it was maybe a risk in their own countries or regions, but maybe in the developed world. There were different approaches that the various executives took depending on where their markets were. But that was, for European executives and American executives, the number one risk. But increasing from surveys before then, supply chain popped up, just as you mentioned, Matthias, as the number two risk in both of those regions. And you see that compared to Asia Pacific, where COVID was number one, and supply chain was often much less considered a risk for Asian Pacific region than for North America, Europe, but certainly coming to the top of the list. And semiconductors, because of the effect on the OEM automotives, but in all kinds of areas from steel to lumber, raw materials, and so on and so forth, possibly putting a brake on what has been a booming economy. And then the third risk that is being looked at, again, from an American viewpoint, inflation. We're seeing that partially due to the logistics issues, supply chain again, partially due to some of the tariffs that were put on the country. So the effect of the cost of steel and other raw materials, including lumber, but Europeans less so, and the Asian Pacific's scarcely at all. Despite the risks that executives see coming down the pipeline in the next 12 to 18 months, in general, there is a pretty rosy attitude towards what the economy is going to do in the next 12 to 18 months. As you pointed out, Matthias, if you took the survey 6 months, 12 months ago, there was a sense of a real uncertainty, but now with the economy continuing to grow and jobs, although not growing as quickly in North America as expected, and the same thing in Europe, but still continuing to grow, jobs being created, and in both economies, actually some of the same problems with companies saying, I need to find people to take jobs. I just can't find the people. I can't find the skill set. So a very similar challenge in both regions, but a positive view towards the economy. So a very strong business confidence. So what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about some of our the projects that we're coming to completion with, and sort of give you an idea of what kind of projects, what are their size, where to some extent, if I can, tell you where they're locating. So the first one I'll talk about is an e-mobility supplier project that's identified as a site in Texas. So I'm not allowed to tell you who they're supplying, but I think most of you can figure out what American e-mobility company they're going to be supplying in Texas. It was a $25 million CapEx facility employing 60 employees. Again, kind of a typical of low employment, relatively high capital investment for that small a number of employees. What this company does is basically a kind of a plastic injection molding process to make very lightweight components, as you see on the right-hand side there, to connect battery components into various parts of the vehicle that is being produced in Texas. And this project is proceeding according to plan. What I want to do there with the comments highlighted in red is explain to you what kind of impact COVID and is having on their business plan. So this plan was made, went forward, and it's proceeding basically according to plan. In fact, if anything has slowed it down, it's basically the community, the bureaucracy in the community or in the state. So the second example is a defense company based out of Switzerland. The company actually makes ammunition, as you can see from the picture on the right-hand side. Ammunition that's sold to police services, the military, also sold to hunters, for example. And there was a negative impact on travel from travel restrictions and trade show cancellations, but the US market was booming in such a way that actually this company doubled its US sales in 2020. And in 2021, they're increasing the sales once again, even based on that base of doubling it in 2020. So the success of their product has been really phenomenal. And this is a project in phase one will be around $200 million capital investment and 200 employees. There has been, in fact, a 12-month delay on the project timeline due to the COVID travel restrictions and other things similar to that. So in fact, this one was truly impacted by COVID. And the third example is a German company that makes polyurethane floor underlay. They selected their facility in 2018 and $50 million capital investment and 100 employees. What I wanted to point out, though, is that in 2021, a related supplier company joined them at this location and is now in the process of building a 150,000 square foot facility. That company will employ around 150 people. And so the economy has not slowed down this growth. In fact, COVID generated a lot of sales because people are doing do-it-yourself construction or rehab at home. So they're buying a lot of product for laying down floors and selling this to Home Depot and Lowe's. So this was really a boon in a sense for a company like this. And it generated a project like this and helped their supplier company to actually add production and jobs as well next to them. So the overall observation in general is that yes, there were many projects that were put on hold that we will not have seen. What all of these projects, basically these three examples, have in common that you cannot see from looking at these slides is that each of them had existing staff, administrative staff in the US that could actually go visit sites, go meet with people, go assess communities, and that helped them to move their projects forward. And so I'm sure that many of you also had foreign direct investment projects where executives or representatives or consultants could come and visit the sites and move projects forward by being able to make decisions on behalf of a company. And as our economy opens, and as you know, in November, Europeans will be able to start coming over here on a regular basis. They can now visit sites, and it'll be much more easier for them to make project location decisions. So we, as the economy here in the US continues to grow, business opportunities will arise and international travel will open up more opportunities for you and your communities.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Jim. And by the way, my apologies that I have switched the slides a couple of times. Actually, I just wanted to have a look if there are questions coming up in the chat or Q&A already, and thereby by mistake, I also changed the slides. So, but also for the audience, if you got any questions already, please feel free to use the chat function, or please, use the Q&A for that. So about what Jim just said, I mean, he went into detail on specific projects that he was working on. I would just like to take the perspective, the broader perspective on the companies in general that we were talking to and working with over the last 1.5 years. Some of you might even be familiar with this slide because I used it before when we had the first webinar with the SCDC on the COVID situation here. I updated it, of course, but I still use it because I think it is still important to see what Jim just said. Our projects have been probably on hold for a while, or they have moved a little bit slowly because the executive couldn't come to the US, but therefore they had representatives or site selection consultants visiting sites for them. And that really also reflects what we see with the companies that we have been working with. Most projects have been on hold or a bit delayed over the last 1.5 years, but not many of them have been canceled because the vast majority of companies we are working with here are family-owned SMEs. So they really have a long-term perspective. They don't have to, they're less oriented on the shareholder value, let's say, and that's why they usually also keep their plans, even though they might be delayed for a while. And the global strategy is unchanged usually. And the US as the market for many European companies will always be attractive. So a company that has planned to come to the US and expand in the US and to the US has usually not changed this unless they were really hit very, very hard by this crisis in a very specific industry. So what are potentially growing FDI source industries? That is something that you have heard in many webinars over the last year, I think. So it might be a little bit repetitive, but what we have seen is that obviously in some parts of the medical sector and medical industry, there are companies that are stronger than they have been before. So they are ready to expand in the United States. It really depends on what kind of medical devices they provide. It's a bit too simple to think because of a health crisis all medical companies benefit from that, because obviously a lot of also public money and funds were invested in specific medical fields that deal with the vaccination or with dealing with COVID. So there was also less money for other areas, obviously, but nevertheless, this is an attractive industry. We will be at or TBIC will be at the Medica health tech trade show, a medical show in Düsseldorf, Germany in a few weeks. And I think there will almost be a record turnout also of companies that are exhibiting there. Then, of course, and that also counts for the pharmaceutical industry, but also for specialty chemicals, the safe supply chains obviously make it also more attractive for countries in Europe, but also in the US, to relocate some of the industries that have been lost in the past. And so some of these companies definitely have pretty good chances in expanding in the US and can be a growing source of FDI. Same goes for the IT industry, where some of parts of the industries have highly benefited from this crisis, the push of digitalization, I would say. And interesting, of course, also the defense industry. Jim just mentioned it with the Swiss company that he's been working with. It is also important to know that the defense companies were usually less restricted in doing business than many other industries, as the products they provide are related to national security or critical infrastructure sometimes. So it was also easier for them to travel, to make deals, and to be successful in that time. And usually it was also not really the defense budgets where many countries were saving money. So that is an industry which went through this crisis, I think, very well, and which offers a lot of opportunities for foreign direct investment in the US too. But also the classic FDI source, so the good old automotive industry, has changed significantly, obviously. I mean, a few weeks ago, and I will show you pictures of that later, we've been to the IAA Automotive Show in Munich for the first time in Germany. And it was quite impressive, like how electric everything has become, let's say. So this is really something that we are looking at. I mean, also one of the latest projects that we had prior to COVID was a company that went to the greater Detroit area, Akasol, who provides battery technology for e-vehicles. So this is an industry which is the traditional automotive industry remains interesting, but of course the electric parts or everything which is related to e-vehicles is growing at the moment significantly. Food processing, obviously, a few weeks ago, we have been to the Anuga trade show in Cologne in Germany, has been one of the biggest shows for a long time, 4,000 exhibitors, I think. This industry is pretty strong, and this industry will also in the future be a strong source of FDI in the US. And then, of course, the classic advanced manufacturing coming from Europe to the US. This is the category in which like 80–90% of the companies, of course, fall that we are working with. So what are potential EDO activities in the short and midterm for FDI recruitment? Another slide that might look familiar for you, even though it has been updated. It has been our last webinar as well. So what can you do if you don't travel, if you don't have the chance to meet with the companies? Of course, maintain the relationships, reach out to companies, also reach out to companies or prospects probably you have been talking to a year ago or 2 years ago. I mean, why not just checking how the situation is, how they're feeling? Because you can provide help and guidance to them. You can meet each other virtually. We're now all open to these kind of virtual meetings, and all of us prefer in-person meetings. I think all of us prefer the personal exchange, but nevertheless, a virtual meeting is always better than no meeting. So take advantage of that. In many ways, it has also become easier now to talk to people on the other side of the Atlantic, because both sides are now really open and used to all kind of video calls. So do your online research, look at the data which is out there, and of course also improve local assets, like work on your sites, potentially certifications. Jim will also elaborate on that a bit more on a slide later. But this is really something that you can do also without traveling to Europe or to South America or Asia or wherever you go to meet with prospects and to recruit FDI to your communities. For those of you who want to travel or who would like to travel, just a brief overview on how the situation looks like for Americans planning to come to Europe at the moment, you need, for most countries that you're entering, you need a proof of vaccination or recovery or a test. So the test, the negative test, is usually enough to come to most European countries. But once you have arrived with a test only, you usually have to go in quarantine for a week or 2 weeks. It's not really enforced. Not every, I mean, in some countries it is, in some places it is, in others it isn't. But being on the legal side of things, let's say, it would mean that you're coming here and first of all, you have to stay in a hotel for 10 days or something. And I think that is not really useful for international travels, especially not for doing business. So what we as a TBIC recommend, or have to recommend, even though we don't want to take a political position or anything, but we had to say to our members that we're coming with us on a trip, we need to have a proof of vaccination or recovery. Otherwise, it will just be very difficult here to travel or to do a 1-week recruitment trip. But it is possible to come here, whereas for Europeans, it was quite difficult to come to the US over the last 1.5 years. We always needed a national interest exception to enter the US, so we had to prove that we are related to significant business and investment in the US or related to critical infrastructure. So it was possible for me, or also for my team members, to travel to the US, but for many companies, it was very hard to get this national interest exception, also because sometimes, sometimes it was not easy for them to exactly describe what they are planning in the US, and especially those who say, well, we would like to invest in the US, but we cannot exactly say whether we plan this next year or in 14 months or something. They had a hard time to get this national interest exception. So now by November 8th, EU citizens who are fully vaccinated are allowed to join, to enter the US again. So this will also be a push, I think, and be a boost also for the projects that are out there on the market, that people can travel to the US again. What's important for you when you're coming to Europe is it can be easier to get in than to get out, but I don't want to set you in panic. It's just like you have to prove a negative COVID test to get back to the United States. That's what the CDC requires. So what we did on our delegation a few weeks ago, in September, you can see a picture on the left of our group. I think there is one gentleman from Alabama who is also part of this webinar today, as I've seen. I'm happy to see you again, Rick. So what we did was we said everyone needs to do a test by the beginning of the trip. Then we did a test with the group by the end of the trip to make sure that everyone comes back home safely, that there are no other problems. We had, whenever we were at a trade show or when we were in business meetings, we were using the mask or we were keeping distance. So it worked out very well. In the end, everyone was tested negative and everyone could go back home. Otherwise, we would have arranged some kind of hotel room, of a way to quarantine and also to help them with a flight back home. But luckily that has not been the case. And it has also not been the case because we were all tested before. It has not been the case because we were careful about the rules, and also in general, the numbers here are comparatively low. So that worked out very well. And just a few impressions of trade shows, of the Anuga show on the right-hand side, this food show that I've mentioned in Cologne, or the automotive show. It was just, I can tell you, a very good feeling to be back in in-person meetings again. And that was also what the companies told us, what also our members told us. Especially the companies that we have been visiting in Austria and southern Germany, you really felt like there was a real desire. They have really missed visitors from overseas, and we had very, very good meetings because, of course, there has been a pipeline for us of great companies that we would like to introduce to members once we have them here again. And that also makes us very optimistic about the rest of the year. We will have our TBIC conference in Atlanta on November 8th. Will also be an in-person conference, our 5th anniversary. We have about 70 participants that have signed up already. Jim will be there, a couple of site selection consultants, also a few German company representatives will be there who are doing business in the US and talk about their experience. So that will be a great way to reunite with many EDOs and members that we have. This event is also open to non-members, so feel free to reach out to me if you would like to sign up, if you would like to join us in Atlanta. Then, of course, in November, there are trade shows in Europe that we are participating in. By the end of November, we are also going back to Italy Italy has been very strict with the corona restrictions, but they're also doing quite well at the moment. Companies are very responsive. We feel safe to go there, also with the group. And then, of course, next year again in February, Austria and Southern Germany, and the biggest industrial show in the world, the Hannover Messe, will take place again. We're about to make a reservation for our booth. So it is good to see that things are going back to normal. And even if numbers should go up a little bit in winter, we're also quite optimistic that by summer next year or spring next year and in April already, a show like this will be no problem at all if we see shows now already. So I would here also like to turn over to Jim again, who after I talked a little bit about traveling and meeting companies, he can also tell you a bit more on what you can do if you're not traveling, or what you can do just to be prepared for the time when you get site visits again, which is hopefully the case soon also for international projects.
Well, hello again. I know some of you are out there saying, oh my God, here he comes again. Sounds like a broken record, but here is a kind of a chain of what you can do as an economic developer in preparing your community and your economic development agency in getting ready for foreign direct investment. And perhaps at the very beginning, we should have asked, why is it so important to look at foreign direct investment as an important segment for your community and your economy? Well, you may be familiar with the Global Business Alliance. It's the organization that represents international companies that have invested in the US. And Jonathan Samford was quoted this year as stating that over the last 5 years, 80% of all new manufacturing jobs in the last 5 years were created by incoming international firms. That's a very powerful comment. But if you think about the announcements that you've seen, many American companies that are making announcements, if you think about it, are data centers, are logistics centers, warehouse and distribution, retail, wholesale. And sure, there are a lot of manufacturing operations being located, but look carefully at the companies that are actually creating a lot of the manufacturing. And it's coming to a great extent out of Europe, once again, and out of Asia, where there's some core manufacturing skills coming and bringing these advanced manufacturing jobs into the US. So when you think about a statistic like that, 80% of new manufacturing jobs coming into the US over the last 5 years, that's 2016 through 2020, that should make your ears perk up and think, this might be something interesting our community wants to look at and focus on. But in fact, I recall Gene telling me that SEDC did a survey, and most economic development agencies don't have a strategy for foreign direct investment. So that's why we keep bringing this slide up to say, look, know your community profile. And I won't even concentrate on that because I know most of you actually know your communities like the back of your hands. But when you go to the next section, looking at your, not the next slide, but the next, can you go back, Matthias? Yeah, if you look at the FDI focus, once you start looking at your unique benefit, your unique assets, that is where some communities start falling to the wayside, because you look at their target industries and you'll hear, oh, it's automotive, it's biotech, it's aerospace. And then you'll find out, well, that's 70% of the communities. Are those really the ones that fit your community? Does it make sense for your workforce? Does it make sense for your infrastructure? Do they match what your technical schools are creating as far as talent pipeline? Does all of that work? And is that a story you can tell to incoming companies? These are the things that you really need to deal with in great depth. And so we say, look at the foreign direct investment focus. Maybe the focus should be cyber security, and maybe it should be not just manufacturing, because manufacturing is maybe everything, but maybe it should be specialty chemicals, or maybe it should be not just automotive, but maybe it should be engine and automation components for vehicles. So focus on what your unique value proposition is for your community, what assets you have to deliver that to companies. And then in particular, when you're looking at being prepared for foreign direct investment prospects, understand that these executives are very demanding. So I'll just give you the example that we had a large project and the community presented to the state project manager a site that the last due diligence apparently had been done 7 years before, and some of the due diligence was really not very viable. So what we ask you to do as an economic developer is know what kind of due diligence you have for your sites and your buildings. Is it viable? Does it need to be updated? Is your site really development ready, or are you relying on old information? Are you assuming that the gas line actually goes up to the site? Have you ever asked yourself, why do these site selection consultants ask for a floodplain map? That's probably pretty obvious because you have a house and you don't want your house to be flooded, so you know you don't want to be in a floodplain. Why do we ask for a utility map? It's not just so that we can see these blue, red, and green squiggles on a map. We need to understand for our clients' benefit how the infrastructure and utilities is set up on the site, and not just where the squiggles go, but what kind of capacity these lines have, what size the gas line is, what size the water and wastewater lines are. And these kind of maps are not always easy to create, but you can lean on some of your utility partners to help you create that kind of material. And those will go a long way towards helping avoid that your community gets eliminated in a site selection project. So again, sounding like a broken record, get yourselves prepared. Make sure you understand not just your community, but also your product.
Jim, just a brief comment from my side. I mean, that's a very important insight, I think, and I know that you will also elaborate on that at our TBIC conference. I just wanted to give the audience the chance to ask questions now, because I know that some of them might have a hard stop at 11 a.m. If there is any question out there, we would be happy to answer it now. Otherwise, Jim, maybe we can keep the last slides a little bit shorter. But sorry for the interruption.
Yes, I know I'm a bit long-winded. Sorry, I get a little passionate about some of the things I talk about. I get a little bit long-winded. I'll try to keep this short. I've talked about the FDI qualified community certification, but basically this goes to the previous slide in that we work with TBIC. We've worked to create a certification. You're all familiar with a site certification, but we do a community certification where we, together with Matthias, look holistically at a community and include a certification of the community as being ready for FDI projects. So not ready for development as a site, but ready for being receiving and negotiating with and landing an FDI project. But because we've looked at your higher education, we've looked at your technical education, we've looked at your utility infrastructure, your sites, your leadership. We've had a workshop on intercultural communication. So you're sensitive to how these kind of companies make their location decisions. So this is something that we offer through TBIC, and you're going to get a copy of this slide, so I won't go through the details of how you apply for it and how this looks, but it is a 5 to 8 week process, basically in timeline. But the companies that we've certified get basically a mock RFI that's completed. Then we do a mock site visit with a workshop. And the benefit is that without risking losing a real project, you get great feedback on what's going right, what's going wrong, where there's some areas that you can beef up in your approach towards working with international clients. And it also gives you a chance to highlight to your local leadership and stakeholders the great things about your community in working with international clients. Here you see over the 3 years, I almost want to say it's been 2 years because 2020 was a year we couldn't really do much in the way of going around and certifying communities, but we've certified 8 communities. The latest community was Bay County, Florida, down near in Panama City, which we just finished certifying about 8 weeks ago.
Jim, and that's it?
That's it, yes.
Oh, that was okay. Perfect. Thank you so much. There's just been a question by Keith on the certification. He asked, what is the estimated costs of going through the FDI qualified community certification? And he also thanks us for the great webinar. I was just about to type an answer, but now we can also say it. I think, Jim, if I'm not wrong, the costs were between $11,000 and $18,000, right? Depending on the size of a community.
That's right, yes.
Because it also depends on how many sites should we look. Is it a community with 1 million people, let's say, where we have to stay also a day longer to do the on-site assessment, or is it rather short? So the average costs have been 14,000 so far for a community, which is, I think, a good price for a product which allows you later as a marketing tool to use as a marketing tool. On the other hand, of course, having an on-site assessment and also leadership training with an experienced site selection consultant like Jim. And yeah, it's also really a lot of fun. We really like to do these certifications. We had a very good time with Becca and Bay County, who did a fantastic job, really. And yeah, it was quite impressive. And it's interesting to do mock site visits also like that, and also to act a little bit like the German CEO, who can sometimes be a bit troubling, but that is then also part of our work, I think, to try to act as real as possible for that.
And we've also been able to do these kind of certifications in areas that have regional alliances, where we can do a regional certification, but where maybe two or more cities say, well, we'd like to have a certification, and it's at a much lower cost. It's just an add-on because they've asked us to do a mock site visit of one of their industry parks, for example. But the region as a whole gets certified for its ability to attract investment.
Are there any other questions at the moment, or any comments? So I just keep a look on that. Jim, when are you planning to come to Europe next time?
It may be as early as early December, but if not, it'll be early next year. Yes.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
So maybe you're too late for the Christmas markets then, but it's good to come. I'm really looking forward. I will take my flight in 2 weeks on Wednesday to Atlanta for our TBIC conference, but I will also stay in the area a little bit longer. So yeah, please feel free to reach out to Jim. He's available when he's not speaking in Oklahoma like this week, or in Indiana very soon. I'm there in the US, and especially in the Southeast every few months, and in the future also more often again than it has been the case within the last 12 months. So yeah, thank you very much for your attention. And Gina, I already see that you're getting ready to ask us a question or to say goodbye to everyone, right?
I wasn't going to ask a question. I was just going to kind of see if there were any others and to wrap things up. But again, we're not on a hard timeline. So if y'all have any other closing remarks.
Well, I was hesitant to add some more comments, but when I was talking about what we're wrapping up as far as projects, it might be interesting for the participants to know what's right now in our pipeline as far as industries. And I'd just written down that we're working on or about to work with some companies in the automotive in the automotive area, consumer products, healthcare, and machinery. So if you think about the targets that Matthias talked about, a lot of those four industries fit into those target categories, but again, consumer products, not really. And machinery, yeah, I guess that would fit kind of in there. Machinery always seems to be a key advanced manufacturing sector coming out of Europe. But what we've seen is for us at least, because we're focused on foreign direct investment, we're seeing more in 2021 than we saw in all of the last 4 years. So that's the kind of tsunami that we expect to be seeing. So the people that tuned in today, those are your smart members because they're looking at foreign direct investment.
Absolutely. And for those of you on the session today, Jim will be on our advanced manufacturing panel. So Jim, you just kind of fit the puzzle for that.
Okay.
So
I look like a jigsaw.
It did, yeah. Absolutely. Well, if there are no other questions from our audience out there, again, we thank you for participating in this virtual event. I think are planning another one. Our education committee is for yet this year. So stay tuned for more information from there. And again, Matthias and Jim, thank you so much for giving us this FDI update. We appreciate it.
Thank you all very much. Thank you for the opportunity.
And everybody have a good rest of the day.